All right. So we are live. Should be live. Hey. Yeah, there's a camera. um, yeah. All right. Hey. So Lee here from Ruby Gold. This is stream 2. We're gonna be continuing work on. The book recording app, the book tracking app. Just want to check and see. Audio should be a little bit better this time. So I've kind of discovered that I have some competing things that like keep depressing my audio. So every time I record a video, especially if you watch my exorcism let's code videos, sometimes the audio gets like squished down low, and I come through very quietly, and you have to like crank your volume up to hear me. Hopefully this video is better, and it is much easier to hear me. The main problem seems to be that when I join a Google Meet video conference, Google Meet tries to like normalize the audio levels and cut out background noise and do all sorts of stuff. And the end result of that is it like squishes the system input level down. So even though in my screen recording software, I have the volume up to input to maximum, Google Meet like squishes it back down at the source input level. And so it's like, you gotta, I have to check all these locations. And that's kind of a nuisance. But I think I got it here. I'm just gonna have to like do a checklist. That's a me problem. That's not a problem for any of you. But here we are. So in this video, and if you're new here, you're just finding this, you're tuning into to anything here. This video, this live stream is going to be separate from the exorcism videos. So if you're looking for some exorcism work, that's not what this is. I should be getting back and recording more of those soon. Ideally, I would hit like a weekly basis. I got a lot going on, so I can't always get those out every week, but I should be back to them soon. But in this one, we're just sort of doing a little bit of exploration, sort of trying to find our happy path through a bit of code to build a book collecting application. So it's sort of a general purpose book collecting application in one sense, but at the same time, it's also like a very specific use case for certain publishers, so certain presses, not even publishers. So to kind of like put some terminology, and a lot of this, the reason I'm spending some time talking about this as opposed to looking at code is, well, let me pull some stuff up, because it might be helpful for you to see a little bit of stuff. So sorry if I'm jumping around a lot. It's kind of how I do this. So in our last stream, we were looking at this mind map that I did, and I was converting the mind map into an ERD. So you can see that I did a little bit off camera. I changed the way that some of these are connected to each other. So the thing about an ERD is they're really good for snapshots, but they're not always the best way to like actually plan stuff. And in this sense, it was just sort of going to end up being, it's a little too early to do an ERD, I think. Maybe like as I do individual models and tables, I can add them in. And again, like in ERD, generally speaking, you're going to generate those from like existing code. So when is an ERD good? So these videos, this channel is really about helping newer people. So let me explain some stuff for some newer people. An ERD, an entity relationship diagram, is it's essentially a snapshot of your database. And it shows the tables in your database. And it shows information about those tables, the columns, the setup, and it shows connections between different tables. And so like it's really good, a really useful time for an ERD is when you're taking over a new project, when you're joining an existing project, moving into a new code base. It's a nice way to get a handle on like what are the tables and the relationships between them. Especially, well, I don't know if it's actually more or less helpful, depending on like your familiarity with the problem space. But it's a nice way. It's one of the ways that I will frequently look at a new code base, a project is I'll generate an ERD and get a sense of at least what the database is doing. So the other thing is like an ERD is a snapshot, and it's either a good indicator that like there's some significant problems with the development of a project, or it's very optimistic and hopeful. Well, sort of in that sense, it can actually be pretty useful for like exposing problems in development, especially if like a project is like failing. It can be very useful to pinpoint problems because like people might think that there are certain connections, like maybe in the code, certain things are forced, maybe reinforced, maybe, force is kind of a stronger word there because like the intention might be one thing and the actual implementation might not like actually be successful. You can commit many sins by writing code that sort of causes one thing to happen, but like your database is like, okay, I guess we're gonna do it that way, but I don't like it. So like what I mean is like, for instance, it's really easy to like quickly look at a table and see that there's like, an ID column to another table. But like, if you look at the database, so maybe not, well, maybe you won't see this in the ERD. It depends on how the ERD generates, but like I've seen databases where they have foreign relationships set up like in a general sense, but there's no link in the database between those, there's no indexes there, there's various problems like this. So it's a nice way to look, but it's not the only way that you can actually look at, it's not the only way you can look at your ERD. I might want to change the name of that. Here, let me swap my face down here and put this on the big screen. That might be a little bit more helpful. Okay, so an ERD is one way to look at this, and I either did a very little bit off camera or I did none off camera. I'm not sure, because actually what I ended up doing was I switched to working on a domain diagram, which is, even though like it maybe is less like, it's either more or less like this, but I actually have a lot more of the data from this mind map over in here. And this is just Mermaid. So Mermaid is like a diagramming superset of Markdown. I don't know if that's how they would refer to it, but that's sort of what I think of it as. It's like it's a superset or subset or something. It's Markdown code, but with like extra special stuff. So like we can declare like, an ER diagram. Yeah, I guess that's right. Entity relationship diagram, whatever. Class diagram. Yeah, I guess that's what this is. I'm still getting familiar with Mermaid myself. But we can like the triple backticks, right? It's Markdown, or it's some code block in Markdown, but like we're specifying the language, right? So if you're not familiar with that, like in Markdown, if you've got Ruby code, and you want to show it, you can just, add syntax. Oh my goodness, I can't type today. You like add syntax highlighting, and actually you can see that it like changed color when I did that, because PT, yeah. Anyway, so we specify that it's mermaid. Yeah, I could have just retyped it faster than all of that. But there's there is and isn't, there's different levels of support. I was playing around with some plugins to get syntax highlighting for mermaid, and I just didn't like them. They changed some things in ways that I didn't like, so I'm just leaving it without highlighting. But yeah, and then that just compiles by mermaid into this thing here. So this probably is a little bit easier to reason through than my mind map here. My mind map was kind of like halfway between an entity relationship diagram and a domain diagram. I was trying to like pull in parts of each thing. But this is probably a lot cleaner. And so mermaid just like has its own opinions, and it will lay stuff out, and it's kind of neat to watch in real time, and like the order of things. So I'm learning about like the order of things to get the layout to be the way I want. So like if I just did like, I don't know, if I move this around, whoops. Maybe that wasn't the right thing. What if I move this one? Yeah, so you can see like it moves and it shifts. And so there's some kind of like fake degree of control that I have by moving things to other locations. And so I'm playing around with that a little bit. Like, yeah, so there's some interesting, like the way that things are. Just, do I want like the arrows like that, or do I want the arrows like this, So, yeah, I don't know. I had it the way I wanted it. I should probably... I'm just going to leave it like that. Let's hope I have it. I should check it in. I should commit. Yeah, actually, I should commit. What do we got in the gem file? Oaken. Yeah, I haven't committed that yet. I'm not sure. Let's see. Ads. Let's see, basic. Standard disclaimer, especially because it seems to be really bad tonight. My typing can be a little bit, I can make a lot of typos because not that long ago, I went through a process of a few weeks of switching from QWERTY keyboard layout to a different keyboard layout. And so like things are all over the place, and I'm still getting used to the muscle memory. And like when I'm thinking about what I'm typing, so if I'm like actually thinking about the key presses, I make relatively few mistakes. But like when I go and I zoom around, because like, so I was never the fastest typist in the world, but I did consistently type in like the upper 90s words per minute. Plenty of people type faster, plenty of people type slower. So high average, maybe. So like when I'm trying to go through and just like write stuff, I'm not thinking about what I'm doing. And some of those old muscle memories, 25 years or something of touch typing on QWERTY, some of those muscle memories get in the way, and they still take precedence. So, and that's probably why, because I'm doing this on camera, that like, it's just, I'm really making those mistakes right now. So it's not that I'm a bad typist. It's not that it's fine. You can be a bad typist. I've talked about this in at least probably a couple of videos. Like, you can be a terrible typist. You don't have to know your keyboard layout. You can still be a good programmer. But it will be very helpful if you can type faster, right? Around as fast as you can think. I mean, or type fast enough that you don't get in your own way, right? You don't want to have to you don't want to lose a thought because you're having trouble typing the whole thing out, right? That's where it does become a hindrance to you, if you're losing thoughts because you can't type fast enough. If that's the case, and you're really serious about your craft, then take some typing lessons. And that's kind of where I am right now, where I often have to slow down to make sure I'm typing correctly. But also, I have 25 years of QWERTY experience. I know I will remap my muscle memory. So I will overcome this, and eventually I will stop giving the disclaimer, because I will just be typing, and that'll be a wonderful, glorious day. So this is just like, I don't need to put a super detailed commit message here. I'm just going to put a basic commit message here. All right, so we're probably not going to do a lot of branching here. Yeah, so also, if you're watching, thank you for the past 15 minutes. Feel free to speed these videos up. I ramble a lot because I find that that's where we can really tease out some of the interesting stuff, but not all of my rambles are useful. So if you need to speed these videos up, please watch them at 1.5 speed or 2x speed or whatever. But also, these videos are targeted at more people towards the beginner end of things. If you're not a beginner, if you're more senior or super senior, and you want to watch these videos, I'm not going to discourage you. I am totally open to feedback. I am totally open to learning new stuff. Actually, this series of videos on the book collecting app is totally I'm going to just be playing around and learning, and it's sort of a self-serving thing. It's also for me to learn test-driven development, because I'll be completely honest, I barely know how to test my code, automated tests. And it's a weakness of mine that I have identified. And I think part of the reason I have this weakness is because so much of the learn to program sort of cargo culting out there, is that the right phrase? So there's so little educational resources that actually do test-driven development. I have seen some. It's not that there's none. It's just that there's so little of it. And you'll find stuff that's yeah, so normally you would want to test, but for the purpose of this video, we're not going to. We're going to assume that you can test or know how to test or want to test. And so a lot of my learning to code was self-driven. There was some classroom stuff. There was a lot of online stuff, tutorials, and a lot of books and so on and so forth. And it's just, there's so much content out there, and it's wonderful. We live in an amazing time. But there's so little content that includes testing or helps you to learn testing. And so unfortunately, I'm not putting blame on anyone specifically, but it just wasn't a thing in like any of the resources that like were my primary resources for learning. So I'm kind of trying to turn around, and that's a big part of why I do my exorcism videos the way I do, to help people sort of get that experience with like how do we move in a test driven sort of way. And this video series is largely around that. It's sort of like the 1-2 of I'm trying to learn it for myself, and while doing so, I'm trying to create this library of work for other people to learn. Now, I don't know. This is not like a let's learn to code video series or anything either. So it's probably going to be, we might have to like hunt through these and find like clips that are useful to repackage and make useful. If anyone actually sits through these, like, let me know, because that's amazing. There's going to be a lot of sessions like this here where I just ramble and rant and talk and whatnot. So maybe not as much code as you might want to see out of these videos. If you want just like density of code, then, my other series, the Let's Code Exorcism series, is going to give you a lot more, just raw code. But we're just having fun. This is we're trying to find a happy path through the code here, and extract some nice gold rubies out of this. So that's what we're going on here. I show this stuff because I want you to understand like where we're going with this, because today we're going to, like, in the remainder of the stream here, which probably, another 20, 30, maybe 40 minutes. I'll probably try to keep this around an hour. Is we're going to try and do two very small things here. So you can sort of see with this diagram that like what's really important here. There's sort of like two things that are at the top. Now, one of them is like super prominent because almost everything connects directly back to it. And that makes sense. It's a book collecting app. So like, yeah, the book is going to be about the most important thing. But there's also this concept of the work. And in my exploration here, I kind of find, so I laid all this out and then I started thinking about like let's look at specific works, specific books, specific whatever, right? So book in this application is sort of like the thing that you buy. And work, in many cases, the book and the work will be the same, but not always. So when will it be different? One example is, let's say the work is The Raven by Edgar Allan Poe. So that's a title. It's a work. You can buy, or presumably you can buy a book that is The Raven by Edgar Allan Poe. Probably not. What you're probably going to buy is The Raven and Other Poems. So in that case, the book might be The Raven and Other Poems. So like if you think about, okay, I'm searching for this book, sure, you're going to search The Raven. And you won't search The Raven and Other Poems. So you might, but like generally speaking, if you're interested in The Raven, you're going to search The Raven. And so the book and the work won't necessarily be the same. The thing you buy is The Raven and Other Poems. The work you're buying is the Raven, and the product, like the thing in your library. So in that case, right, the work is going to show like The Raven, and then it's going to show like also appears in, right? And so it's going to, like, any book sold by this press that contains The Raven, right, you're going to see that information, or at least that's the goal. So you're going to see like 2 copies of The Raven and Other Poems, and you're going to see a copy of, you might see like a really fancy edition of The Raven with illustrations by Gustave Doré, right? So like there are cases where you can get just The Raven, and then the book and the work are technically the same. but not always. Other instances where it's different is like the Lord of the Rings. So the Lord of the Rings is fascinating because as J.R.R. Tolkien wrote it, he considered that the Lord of the Rings was a single book published in 3 volumes. But if you go to the bookstore and you ask for the Lord of the Rings, they're probably going to give you the trilogy, which is 3 separate titles. And but the difference here is you can very well go to a bookstore. Well, I would think that you could very well go to the bookstore and buy just one of the titles. So the Fellowship of the Ring, the first of the Lord of the Rings, you can buy that by itself. So again, the book and the work will probably be different here. And so apologies, broadcast issue. Let's see. I think I'm live again. Yeah. All right. Looks like I'm live again. So probably if you're watching the video on demand, there's going to be a minute there where nothing happened. I just stare at my screen confusedly. Broadcast issue. The stream got interrupted. Hopefully it doesn't happen again. The joys of subpar internet service. Yay. But I try to resume and it looks like we're still going. So the stream was interrupted, but it should just be a single VOD. You missed nothing because I paused as soon as it flashed up on the screen. So what I was saying is the book and the work is like the same thing. And this is a bad example. The Raven's going to be a single book. You're going to get a single volume, right? But some publishers will, some presses, and I'm trying to like draw this distinction between publishers and presses, and printers are a whole different thing. But like in this case, the press is the company that you're buying the book from. So somebody published the book, and then a press came along and got like republishing rights, like the rights to republish it, and they're or not republish, but like release it in their own special edition. So their custom binding, their custom paper, maybe some of their custom artwork, etc. They might take a book, a longer book, a book that's 600, 700, 800, 900 words. And because maybe they use a larger font size and so typesetting, the idea of publishing a volume like that in thicker papers, right? So if a book is 900 pages long, the paper's got to be pretty thin, right? Or else you're going to have a huge volume. I do not have a great example handy right? But you know what I'm talking about. Like there's like book paper tends to be pretty thin. But you've also maybe seen like on a shelf, like an old book, it's yellowed, it's decayed, it's, more premium papers tend not to have that, but also more premium papers tend to be a little bit thicker. Not all, but many. And so like these presses might cut the book into 2 volumes. So it's still the one work, right? So what is an example? I think in the last stream I mentioned briefly the Song of Ice and Fire. So the series, The Song of Ice and Fire, is several books. And the first book in that series is A Game of Thrones. And so generally speaking, you go to the bookstore and you ask for A Game of Thrones. And they're probably going, no, they might ask like, oh, okay, so is it the first volume? Do you just want book 1, or do you want like a couple of books in the series? Do you want the whole series? But if you say the first book in the series, you're going to get 1 book. But some fancy presses out there, because it's a longer book, or because they're adding original art, or because their paper is very thick, or because their font size is very large, or any number of reasons, might actually sell you what you would call 2 books. Now, it's 1 book, but it's 2 volumes, and that's how our domain is going to look. where a book is the book and it's separate from the work, right? So we also have this other thing called series, and there's the author series, which in this case would be the Song of Ice and Fire, right? And so the author series that we're going to create is like when there's multiple books. So how do those map back to the work? Well, the work is probably the book, but we might do another thing where work can also be an author series. We have to tease that out and see if that's correct or a false premise. So we'll figure that out. But until then, we're just looking at some of this stuff. So what are we trying to do? We're going to try and, 30 minutes in, see if maybe what we can do is at least get, because I kind of feel like this work here should be sort of like the very first thing that we do, because author series might map to that, but books will definitely map to that, because books, another way that this could have gone and could still go is like the concept of editions. So you might be buying like a regular edition, you might be buying an anniversary edition, you might be buying a deluxe limited edition of a book. So we could consider all of that. But looking at the way that some presses do this and the way that this particular press that is the focus of this initially does it, they're books in that sense. So like, let's call it The Raven and Other Poems. Let's stick with that one to reason through. They will sell that same book, and really like there's multiple works in there. So we might like each one of those works might have a page, have a piece, have a record of a work. We'll have to figure that out. Should The Raven be a work and The Raven and Other Poems be a work? Probably not. Probably The Raven and Other Poems will be a book. So that book might point to multiple works, right? Because like you can think of it like an anthology collection, right? Ursula K. Le Guin writes, all these stories, and the Library of America publishes a volume that has tons of separate works that if by any of the original publishers would have been completely separate works, right? They're not in a series with each other. They're not in a continuum. They were released as separate books, but an anthology brings them all together. So like, I think those would be different works in the same book. So that book will point to multiple works. So we have to think about that mapping. And it will actually sort of be like a has and belongs to many. So the works and books. Works have many books and books have many works. So like we're sort of doing like a has and belongs to many there. So we need to figure that out. That might be, that actually might look differently in the database than I was initially thinking it would be. See, and this is why we think this out. But we do need to write some code. But I just feel like the work is a little bit too important to skip, because it's a little too high. It's like, I don't want to start with book because pretty much I know that books will point to works. Now, the fact that works also point to books, possibly. Well, works don't necessarily need to point to books. Maybe it's not a has and belongs to many. I may have just confused myself. Books will point to works. Books will contain works. The book is the thing you buy, and it contains works. Usually it will contain one work, but it might contain many. That's where it becomes a problem. Many works for a single book. Yeah. So I was thinking that there would just be a single ID, the work ID, but we might actually have to do a joins table for that, for books that contain many works. That's fine. I mean, it changes a little bit, but it doesn't like fundamentally change anything. It doesn't break anything. It doesn't make anything harder. But I think it's kind of nice we've realized that now. Huh. Actually, so I said this was important. I kind of want, and this is where like, this is where this gets a little dicey. So, whoops, wrong key. So if I change this, is that better or worse? I'm not really sure if that's better or worse. Oh, you know what? When I zoomed out, it went back. I liked it when it wasn't. Okay, well that didn't really change anything. I wanted to put press actually higher. So maybe work we won't do. Maybe we will actually start with press and book. So I think I was mixing up in my head where I wanted to start. So see, press is here and it's kind of like hidden. I wish it would stay like that. I kind of like it. I may have to play around with it. It's going to go back, isn't it? Yeah. I kind of want to play around and see if I can get this to default where press is like outside of things here. Because ultimately we're talking about books from a press. The press sells these books. The books are sold by the press. And so we're not doing a user model yet. We're actually going to do that down the road. It's not important right now. Right now, what I'm aiming for, what I'm working towards, is to have an application where I can just dump the data in for the books and it can start there. And then the things like users and marking for yourself that you own a book or putting it in a wish list, or, those things we can add on, but they're not critical to the functionality of this app. The functionality is that the books are there. You can search for them. You can add them, etc. Like that's the critical functionality. So that's where we're starting here. Right now, the users don't matter because it's not something that we're having users log into yet. And it's really not super important. But if I were doing users, I would want some kind of a team over top of users first. And that's sort of what a press is. if our books were users, then the press would be our team. So we can think of it like the books belong to the press. And that plays into some of the things that we're going to do. So I actually want to start with the press. And I think what that means now, finally, right before we wrap up, let me see if I can zoom in a little for you here. That might be a little easier to see. Do I need to zoom in again? Let's see how that goes. Let me know if you rewatch this video on demand, if that's zoomed enough at this point, or if I should zoom in more. So normally I don't use scaffolds for a lot, but I think I've already, why is it auto suggesting that? I don't know. So I don't usually use scaffolds, but I think I'm going to try using a scaffold here. So a big part of why I don't really use scaffolds is because like a lot of what I do like on a day-to-day basis is I'm pinpointing like specific areas, specific things to work on. And so like there's a lot of the time where I probably need a model, I might need a controller, and I might need like a page. And my controller, like maybe I just need a create action, like, well, a new action. Like maybe I need new and index, or maybe I don't even need index. I just need new and edit, new, create, edit. Like I don't always need everything. And so like scaffolds, you'll see if you've never seen before, we'll just like dump a ton of files, right? Because it's going to create my model. It's going to create my controller. It's going to create my test files. It's going to create a helper file, and it's going to create maybe a concern, probably not a concern. Yeah, not a concern. But it's going to create all these files, and like sometimes like I need like 2 files, right? So usually I just create the stuff I need. Maybe I'll generate the controller, maybe, or something. But I'm going to try a scaffold here and see if it actually is helpful to just get us, because like we have nothing right now. So press, let's see. Oh gosh, it's been a while since I've even done a scaffold generator. Yeah, so I think, right, it's the name of the model, press. And then do we do the fields? Can we generate this with the fields? Did I even have press on here? Apparently I don't have press. See, and like I wasn't thinking of it in the beginning as being particularly important, partly because this was all originally going to be for a single press. But in reality, we're doing multiple presses. So we know, like, yeah, obviously the press is going to have an ID. So we're going to have a short code for our press. I'm just going to do it like that. And the short code is going to be a string, basically. Yeah, the press is going to have a name, right? What else? So when we have a press, they're going to have a name. They're going to have a short code. We could do like other stuff. We'll probably add in information later. Like how much do we want to know about the press? Do we want to know like what year they were founded? That's kind of interesting, but it's not critical. We kind of want to know, we might want to know where they're located, like country at least, if not more detail, like more specific, but like maybe a country. We might do country, location, country. We might want things like where do they ship to, in case it's not international, but they probably do. We might want things like what do they specialize in, right? Are they, so like maybe a type of press. So are they a big publisher, or are they a private press? Are they a fine press? Are they a big, just like bindery, right? So we might have a type. I don't know that I've thought about it enough for what I want for that. So let's sort of like put a note here that we're probably going to add that in later, but it's not critical to have right now, because like nothing else is probably going to read that information right now to be able to start getting our data. Because like I want to get to the point soon, probably the next stream or something, where we can actually like start putting some data in and start to test some of our assumptions about the data model and so on. So the type of press is not particularly important right now, right? Like, so do they focus on leather bound? So maybe like something like that will be important. That's probably separate from type. We could do like down the road, we might do, what is their price range? Maybe, is it a cheap, median, expensive press or something? Probably have to think about it differently, because some presses will have like a huge range. So it probably not as simple as low, medium, high. Probably need to have some kind of nuance to it. Maybe a price range, like what is their lowest typical work versus their highest typical work. And even there, like it can be varied. You might see a small private press that does like books from $65 to $3,000, right? That's kind of a big range. So this might be all that we actually need to start with. Let's see what we get. So this is what I'm talking about. Like we get a ton of files generated. So we get our migration, we get our model, we get a press spec from our spec, we get a route. It generates a route for us, or well, resources. So we can look into that and see what that does. We get a controller, we get Tailwind stuff, which includes all of our pages here. So this is our standard CRUD actions. Oh, interesting. I have to look at how that works. That it generates a partial with the name, and I probably know what that. I probably know what the file is used for. It probably is like called on the show page or something. I don't know. Anyway, resource route, RSpec, more RSpec stuff. Tailwind specs. Interesting. I don't know Tailwind, so I'm not really sure what these are testing here. Helper, like I said, and a spec for the helper. And see, this is where it's starting to get into the realm of like, this is just so much stuff, much of which I might not even use. So we did this with a scaffold, but I might not do a scaffold for any of the further pieces here. And then some JSON builders, which I kind of, that's also another thing I don't use a lot of. And if this ends up being something that maybe has a public API to it, maybe that might be helpful. We'll probably want to implement it differently, but I'm going to leave that for now. So we got a whole ton of files, right? We got a ton of files. another way to look at it is in the the Git client. So where does that get us? Well, we know now if we run the application, we're actually going to get an error or something because, any guesses? So what? Presses, right? So here's our first error message. Pending migration error. So as you saw, when we generated this, we got one of the files was a migration, which would be in here, right? So I'm gonna actually shut down my server. So like another reason I don't often do Another reason I don't often do scaffold is because I like to be very specific on this stuff. So like I'll typically, actually, if I'm adding stuff, like brand new stuff, so like we didn't have presses before and I'm adding presses, I often will start with my migration. My data model is important to me. And so that's where I tend to start with a lot of stuff. Now I'm not afraid to have multiple migrations if I'm doing some work, and if I'm working, I'll probably like run the migration, do some development, maybe find out I need to add some stuff to my migration. So like I'll roll it back and I'll modify my migration some more, and then I'll reapply it and I'll move on from there. So I do a lot of that. But here, I mean, we know we need a shortcode and a name. And that's kind of like all that we really need right now. So our table is also going to have timestamps, so your created at and updated at columns. And we're going to create IDs, right? Does create table just automatically create IDs? So, sorry, this is on the other screen. So here, where does it say this? Create table. Yeah, so down here, whether one of the options we can pass in, right, is ID. And so whether to automatically add a primary key column defaults to true. So if we don't specify that, it should default to true. And I'm just going to use default. So yeah, I don't need to specify that at all. And yeah, that all looks good. So I think we're good here. Let's run the migration. So we would run the migration. If you're not familiar with this, you can also like query the status of your migrations. Now we only have one, but it's currently down. So if we run our migrations, db migrate, create the table, so it ran the migration. Check this again. The difference is it should be up, and it is. So we're all good there. So now if we boot our server back up, we should get what we expect, which is that page will actually load correctly. Yay. So there's some defaults here. because we have Tailwind, and it probably would do this with Bootstrap as well, we get some default styling. And so it does like a fancy, I'm so used to coming from like older Rails that we don't get any of that by default. But also I haven't done a scaffold in a long time, so maybe that's been common a lot longer than I realize. This is actually pretty nice, just default styling. You know, it's not fancy or custom or anything, but it's pretty nice. And here's the downside of this. We put them in that order, and that's the order they show in, which is not actually probably the order that I want, but that's fine. So I called this video Clueless Clueless TTD. So we are like 56 minutes into this stream, and we have not written any code, and we have not done any TTD. So welcome to my streams. This is probably how too many things will go. I mean, obviously we'll have more and more code as we go along. I'll leave that open for now. But we're sort of at the point where we're ready to, I guess, do some testing. Because I can kind of tell you that if I do this, right? So I'm not trying to like give, be too public about what these companies are, but also it doesn't matter. I mean, this is a public thing anyway. So one of the company that I'm building this to reference their products of is this company, Easton Press. And I know that like there's going to be a flaw here where if I do this and I go back to this and then I create a new press and I call it EP and it's for Easton Press, and I create a new press and I go back to my presses, I've got a problem, right? I've got multiple presses that are of the same name, and like it's totally unnecessary, and this is totally wrong, and this should not happen. Like where was the failure? And so like I know this stuff. Obviously, I'm belaboring the point here, but it's still something that we don't want to allow. So we still want to prevent that, right? I'm going to destroy it. Oh, that was interesting. I was not prompted to confirm that I wanted to destroy that. I wonder if that's a new default. I'll have to look in to see how that's implemented. I was expecting a confirmation. Interesting. It's very interesting, like, because I really cut my teeth on like Rails 5 and 6. And, well, I mean, I've spent a lot of time in Rails 7. But like I've never done like from scratch 7 stuff like this. So I was surprised. That just deleted. And let's also destroy that one. So we have none. We have no presses anymore. So what we want to do is let's think about some tests. Hey, look, I've got a tab for testing. All right, so if we just run this, we've got 14 pending tests and 13 passing tests. All right, so we just ran the specific spec because I don't really care about these route tests here. For stuff that, yeah, I really don't care about those. So I'm right now just interested in the press spec. And we don't need this one, so we'll get rid of it. So we want like to reason through some tests here. One thing that we definitely know is we don't want that's very funny. I'm just looking at what the LLM generated here. What is this, Copilot, I guess? And we might actually play around and consider some suggestions from Copilot. It's kind of interesting in the sense that when Copilot first rolled out, you had a lot of division, right? Is it a good thing? Is it helpful? Does it make us more productive? Is it a plagiarism factory? Is it, you know, what is it doing for us? And a lot of people early on reasoned that Copilot was very useful for writing tests. And the reason is it can come up with a bunch of code suggestions for you that test a bunch of cases, and it can set up your tests and do a lot of stuff. A lot of stuff in like test setup and teardown and whatnot for you. And it can write that, and it can do a reasonable guess at what you might want. It can also do a poor job of it. Like, I don't think we even have factory bot in our application. So like that would just blow up. We don't have, like, these tests will blow up because like we have a name and we have a short code. We don't have a URL and we don't have a description. But interestingly, it kind of makes me wonder, did we miss some like important fields? Maybe we missed, like, maybe we should have a URL and a description, which we could use, especially like a URL. We could presumably use that to generate based on when we get to the book side of things, and the books have a code from the press, like the internal identifier at the press. If the URL follows a format like press.com/ID, we could just auto-generate those links on our application. So I think URL, while not mission critical, is a thing that would be very nice to have. So that might be something that we add in a description. So we talked about like a lot of like those specifics, like what do they specialize in? What is their price range? So maybe what we could do is like start with a description. And so it's just a text area. And then like down the road, we actually expand it to be like if there's individual columns that we want to store. So yeah, this is pretty interesting, actually. I think here's what we're going to do. We're going to roll back our migration. I always forget, is it DB rollback? Yeah. So we drop the table. We have one down. So I could delete the scaffold. Does it? Can I just add to the scaffold and regenerate it? Oh, okay. So if I forced it, I'm just kind of curious. So what is like a page? Okay, if we look at the forces. So here's what I'm curious about. Shortcode name URL. So it did regenerate this. How far can we push this? If I want to change the order of these, right? So I kind of wanted to have this name shortcode. So what is the generator? Is it just text, I think? So we don't want a string. We want something a little bit longer. I think text is what we put there. I'm curious if it will change the order. Name, shortcode, description, URL. Look at that. You know, I thought I wanted the name and shortcode order swapped around, but to be honest, I'm not actually sure that I prefer that. It's not, well, it's not that big of a deal. That's easy enough to swap around. So in the migration, oh look, it even removes the old migration and generates the new one. That's neat. So this is actually kind of useful. The fact that we can just have it overwrite the files that would change, which is one of those. I mean, just Rails can be really cool. Yeah, why do you want to keep asking me? Okay, so yeah, it even changed in the migration. It swapped the order of those around. All right, so let's rerun this migration now. Right, and so it deleted the old migration, so we still only have one there. This actually was super helpful. Because I was thinking like maybe we have to delete the scaffold, which will delete all the files and then generate them again. But no, we actually could just overwrite. So that's good. Check some, sort of like check this out. Yeah, look at this. Cool. Right. So text tells it it's stored in the database as text. I guess that's what the column is. And so, right, so like a string is something short, a text is going to be longer. So we might have a big blob for a description there. And in fact, we might actually like allow that to be robust. So we might use like active text there later, so we might not even keep that as a column by default. Action text, right? I think action text creates its own like, because it uses like different tables in the database, but we can leave it like that for now. This gives us a little bit more to work with. Cool. So coming back to this test here, yay, we get a different different suggestion, and this time there's only one. So I mean, let's think about these. I think you can probably read them reasonably well. Plug something in over here. Okay. If we write one test and implement it to pass, then I will consider the stream a success. Yeah. So, all right. So what is it suggesting here? Let's, I'm actually going to accept this, and we're going to go through it and see if these even make sense for us. So it is valid with a name do. Oh, I mean, that's kind of a useless test. It is valid without a name do. Invalid without a name. Yeah, that one actually kind of makes sense, right? So, oh yeah, I was talking about like these Copilot LLMs and whatnot, and it's like people made a good point that like they can be helpful for writing tests, but you have to like use a critical eye with them and make sure their tests make sense. Make sure the tests cover enough. Make sure, like, you have to give them a critical eye. And at the end of the day, if your stance is that like your tests are so important, like your test suite has so much power over the quality of your code that like, is it really something you want to give the responsibility to the dumbest intern in the room? That was rude to interns. Is it something you want to really give to like the least experienced developer in the room, like the most important piece of work? You know, like it's one thing to empower people and give them responsibility and like push them, but like we don't want to hand off the important stuff and not even like double check it. So I've heard some very good arguments that like the tests are like the last things that you should be giving to your Copilots and your LLMs. I know there's other ones besides Copilot that people use. But I think I kind of hit in the middle, because my experience with it is it's like the largest pool of knowledge, but the least experienced developer. Like it knows everything. I mean, it doesn't know everything, but it seems like it knows everything. It just has no clue how to actually put it in place. So like I'm at this point, having used Copilot for over a year, probably it's less useful to me now than it used to be. Because like the novelty in the beginning, it was kind of a cool thing to work with. But so many of its suggestions these days, I just kind of like throw out or rewrite most of that. Like, I don't know that I'll renew another time. I renewed once. I don't know that I'll renew again, because like, if I can just pair with somebody, that's so much better than having Copilot there. But not everyone's in a position to pair with somebody. And right now, Copilot is my pair. So I'm not going to throw it out entirely, but I'm going to look at what it's doing and see if I kind of like it or not. And so that's where I'm at. So let's look at, I added this test back. I want to see the differences here. So like it checked, it does this dot valid check here, separate from the expectation. I see. That is definitely not the way I would have thought to write this. So yeah, let's just run that. Let's not even run the test. Let's do the code ourselves. Right? So yeah, you're going to get an error. So press is undefined. Press is just nil. Right? So some of these tests seem strange. I don't know that these are good tests, but also I don't know anything about testing. I'm gonna run this as is. Did it save? Save it back. We're gonna leave all those tests in there that it generated. Okay, so two passes, 2 fails. See, and this is where like that first test, it's not testing anything. I'm going to skip this test. And this last one here returns a press's name as a string. So so the reason I'm going to skip them right now. So, right, we can just put this X in front of it and like that tells RSpec to skip it. I think. Oh, it marks them as pending. Right, pending, not skip. So they don't run, but they're still there. I think that's fine. I'll just run with that. They're so meaningless to me. But these are tests. These tests are things that we actually want to test, right? We do want to enforce a name, and we do want to prevent duplicate names. So those are both valid. How does this work? FD, I think. So press. So, right, the difference here is I like to run RSpec tests like with documentation. So this is FD, format documentation. What is the full form of that? Is it like... I don't know if that's right. That's not right. I don't know how to do it. So we're just gonna we're gonna do the one that I know. And this is something I do like about RSpec, to think these things through. And like we'll get to like we'll have more stuff here. We'll have contexts and we'll have like scenarios. And so like to be very readable what these are. So we can see that like press is invalid without a name. Like that's good. So far, so good. So let's assume the test is good, right? Let's pretend that the test is written well. And it might not be, but let's pretend that it's written well and try to implement this. Whoops. So yeah, that's kind of right. We want so far as that, right? Probably we probably want the other piece of that too, but we're going to stop there. And here's why. So before that, let's see, this is, how does this work? Yeah, okay. So we can also put a specific line number and run the test on that line. So basically I'm trying to target, because like for test-driven development, I'm trying to do one thing at a time. And basically I'm trying to write the least amount of code to make the next either pass the test or get my next error. So the error message right now is my expectation. We expected the errors hash, or the errors array, to include can't be blank. So by writing this piece of code, let's run that test again. Hooray! This stream at 83 minutes, an hour, what is that, an hour, 20 minutes? This stream is a success. Yay, we did it. People should be very proud of us. We made it to the point where we wrote and passed a test for our first model. Yay. Congratulations. Thanks for watching. Cool. I can retire happy now. I mean, I kid, obviously. But so that passes, right? So if the test is good, then cool. What we should see now. So if I just try to save this, I should get an error message, right? Oh, it doesn't highlight the fields that are broken. I wonder if that's also like recent. So it's both a love and a hate thing. Like Rails had this way of indicating the fields that generate the error message, but it was like so awkward because it would wrap the whole field in a div that had like is error class or something. I wonder if that was something that we only got with Bootstrap, or was it Rails specific? It may have been like a Bootstrap only thing. And so since I'm using Tailwind in this application, maybe we don't get it for that reason. Or it's just no longer in here. So that might be something that we need to add back or want to add back. highlighting of the field that is broken. And I mean, we should be able to see. So yeah, it was post here. So it tried to submit and then actually just rendered the new form again. Cool. So yeah, we got one test passing. You know, I really don't. I don't like that. I'm not going to leave that there. And this one is so pointless. Tests that it returns a press's name as a string. Like, that feels like it's a test written to test Rails. And I don't need to test Rails. So I don't want that test either. Here, so line 10. So we just deleted some code. So now our line 10 test should fail. Is invalid with a duplicate name. So essentially what's happening is, right, this test is failing because you can submit multiple of the same name. There's no duplicate, there's nothing to prevent the duplication, right? So that's where, don't do that. I just wanted, sorry. Yeah. What, interesting. Did we really not get an ID column? No, because create table creates an ID column. Let me see if I can pull this up. See if I can pull up a all right, so I think I've got a database here. We can see we've got a presses table. Yeah, it's got an ID column. So I'm not understanding this message, am I? So, all right, unique validation without index. So is this telling us that if we want to set a column as unique, we should index that column? That is interesting to me. So I wouldn't have necessarily added an index on the name column, but I very much would have added an index for my shortcode column. So I don't know that I'm doing this right. Let's let's see. Creating a new table. So I'm creating a table. Right. So like I do these add columns all the time. I guess we have nothing to lose. We just, where's my rollback? There it is. So, I mean, if this breaks, it breaks, right? So we add the column, and then we're adding an index. Is this really... So see, like I'm used to using add index. Here we go. Okay. Maybe. Well, this is in the products. Yeah, this is so yeah, this looks like more like what I think I would be doing here. Okay. So we are going to not use these at all. We don't need those. We're going to make our indexes here. It still wants us to declare these as unique. Can we do that? Yeah, okay. I see. So in this users table, obviously you don't want name to be unique, but email would be. So well, this is actually kind of interesting to me. Because do we want presses to have unique names? At first, it seems like that's correct. But the truth is, I don't think it is. I think we just want this to be an index. And here's why. Sometimes a press is like a business. So I'm trying to think, do I know an example of this? Is this right? No. Why am I even Heritage Press? So I think this is the example I'm looking for, maybe. Yeah, right here. The Heritage Press is a trade name which has been used by multiple printers and publishers, most notably an imprint of George Macy Companies. So in 1929, George Macy, blah, 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 sold the company, and it was sold to another company. And in 1973, another Heritage Press emerged. So they would both actually be called Heritage Press, right? And then there's this Michigan and this British Heritage Press. So I don't think I actually want those to be unique. So our test is wrong and our code is wrong. We want it, we might as well make it an index. So I'm okay with that. The short codes, however, very much we want to be unique. So run our migration. And this is easy to like drop and rerun these, roll back and rerun these migrations, because like we have not persisted any data yet in the database. So it's really like, there's really no problem here. Even still, like in a larger app, like I might still do that if it's a new table, because like I still probably don't have any persisted data in my my development database yet. So until like I commit this and push it and like this code is actually run somewhere else, or like I have substantial development data that I need, like until that point, yeah, I'm gonna drop this table again and again and again until I sort of like kind of get it right. And this is where like, you know, we started out with these diagrams, but we knew that they couldn't be like, they're sketches, they're approximations, they're kind of like what we want to get to, right? And this is like the whole way that we develop here at Ruby Gold. Like we're looking for the happy path. We don't have to have things perfect from the start. We're trying to find our way, right? You're digging in the mines. Maybe you're digging a shaft, doesn't lead anywhere, so you got to go backtrack and dig a different shaft, right? I guess that's how miners do work. I've never worked in the mines. The ruby mines, yeah, but not the real earth mines. So actually, if we think about it, we run this test again. I don't remember if we ran it the way it currently is or not. So it passes. This is to belabor the point, right? So let's ask Copilot. Let's see what it comes up with. Sometimes I don't know why. Like, is it thinking? Does it not know? There we go. That's funny to me. It just seems wrong. It's probably not like the way that anyone would actually write this. Let's run this whole test suite. I'm going to re-enable this one. Okay. So we're going to run this because this, the errors, the problem with testing, right? This is actually no longer a valid test. So basically what we want to do is have the success and failure flip, right? And I mean, we know that's real easy to do here. Right, if we just get rid of we should see the test flip. Yeah, okay. So we can get rid of this test now, which is totally invalid. Technically, like this test passes, but it's not testing anything of particular importance, right? So we validated that, like, we flipped the case here, but we don't really need this test anymore, so I'm getting rid of it. And we're back to one test, and our test passes. Cool. Yay. Big deal. Wonderful. Okay. So our short codes. I mean, I guess we could just like write a basic test here for short codes and kind of like get the same thing. Maybe I should, I don't know, maybe I should maybe I should just run these down here where it's closer to what we're doing. We're dealing with like tight screen real estate here. I mean, I could maximize my window, but I don't like to. So, all right. So in this case, we could do a couple of things, right? We could, how do I tab between? I don't know how to tab down here. Right, we could do that. And then like our validations on name and shortcode presence are true. But now if I want to test, if I want to validate, well, let's write a new test, right? It is, why would I write a test that tests what I already have? These tests are like so sloppy, but I mean, that on the surface looks like it'll do what we need. So we should now have a failing test, right? And so the problem is like, to test the validate the uniqueness of this, right? We have to like, yeah, that seems to be, now what's it saying? Did I not write that in my migration? Yeah, like I totally, as far as I can tell, that's there. Is it something with like, no, server's not even running. So, well, regardless, so here's the thing. I don't really, this is one way we could do it, right? So maybe we want to validate things that need to have a presence and then separately validate things that have a uniqueness. That's actually not, you know, now that I think about it. So I was going to say, what I was going to do was separately, So I was going to do it like this to maybe it's just having trouble like indexing. I don't know if I don't have my LSP set up correctly on this. Because I noticed it's just been spinning its wheels the whole time. So maybe it just doesn't know that I actually have my database set up like that. Anyway, what I was going to say is I was going to do it like this. And then, so, whoops. Right. And then remove shortcode from here. But as I think about it, I think maybe I prefer maybe after all, I prefer this. So if the line itself is essentially saying this line validates things that need to be present, and this line validates things that need to be unique. So, whoops, I think I'm going to go with that. This is not actually how I would normally have written that, but I'm going to go with it. So where this leaves us then is that we have created the ability within our application to create a press that has a name and has a short code. Description and URL, I don't really want to require them. So I think I'm not going to require them. Oops. Yeah. So there's going to be like various forms of cleanup. We're going to have to like validate these URLs. We might have some validations that we want to run on these to make sure they're in some kind of a proper URL format. Or we might have some handling on them that like puts them in the database in a certain way. Or we just sort of like assume that the administrative people creating presses, if it's going to be restricted to administration. Right. So this is a complex thing that we're going to have to think about and maybe come up with a plan for. Because like for some people, this is a URL. For some people, this is a URL. For some people, this is a URL. You know, and like, what do we want to allow and what do we want to sort of like force people to do? What do we want to sort of... There's some decision making to be had there. I was wondering if there was like a blurb I could take from them for a description based on what they might want to describe themselves as. But I don't really see such a thing. I want some text in the description, even though we're not going to require it. I'm just going to add that there. So here's another thing. We might want to think about some other validations. Like, do we want a minimum or maximum length for either of these fields? Not really. I mean, short code should be short, so maybe we want them under 5 characters. That might be something we want to add. Let's do that. And then if we find out that our assumption is wrong later, we can change it. So, all right. So the way that these are written, press is invalid without a name. Press is invalid without a short code. Press is invalid with a duplicate short code. Press. So is invalid. So, right, we got these is invalid statements. Press. Right. It's a little bit like choppy to say it that way. It is invalid without an, right? It is invalid without a short code. It isn't, right? It's a little bit strange like that. So maybe what we want to do is like it must have a short code. Right, so must have a short code 5 or fewer characters long. Hey, thanks for the thumbs up. So yeah, so this is what, 1, 2, 3, let's do this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, yep, 5 and 3. Okay, so run this again. We should get a fail. And that means that, right now, by doing it this way, we sort of put ourselves in a different situation where if I had grouped like the name validations and the shortcode validations, I could just append my length validation on shortcode. But if we're doing it by like presence and uniqueness and length, like we might have a problem where we've got a lot of different length validations. Right, so, okay, presence, uniqueness, and length requires us to write 3 lines of validations minimum in this scenario, whereas if we were doing name and shortcode validations, we would only have 2 lines of validations. And I think I might be swaying, the pendulum might be swaying. I might be thinking that it's better to go with that instead. So okay. One thing we have to be careful of here is let's make sure that we still have the same passes and failures without. So we updated some code. We did a little bit of refactoring, which means we changed code, but we don't want to change behavior. So it looks like we still have the same test passing, right? We changed code, but not behavior. And this is in service of, I want to have sort of fewer lines of code here. So I am going to make it based on like the individual fields. I've always done it this way, and I think I sort of just hit on a reason why. But I kind of liked the other one up until I got to a validation that might be different for every field, right? So if we continue to do it by the thing we're validating, name, presence, right? So presence fields, and then uniqueness fields. Once we get to length fields, if they're not the same rule, we need a new one for each different length. So we would have like short code length 5. Maybe, description length 30, right? For like maybe a minimum kind of a thing, right? So we might have like all these separate ones. Whereas if we do it by the field name, well, we still could end up with a bunch of validation lines. And if we need to validate rules about a lot of different fields, if we have 30 fields on the table and we do it by name of the field, then yeah, we might have to have 30 lines of validation. Whereas if we're just validating like common things like presence, uniqueness, maybe 2 lengths, in that case, yeah, it would actually be shorter to validate by the thing we're validating. So there's no like right answer. It's what is best for your code base. And right now, I think this is the better approach. Length is 5 is not what we want to do. Since this is not giving us what we want it to do, I'm going to go and look for this is what I want. Maximum, right? So length. Maximum 5. Well, that was unexpected. So why did that test fail now? Invalid with a duplicate shortcode. So expect the errors to include has already been taken. Expected is too long. Oh. So it seems like this one failed because it's giving the wrong error message. Right. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And that makes sense. Okay, so essentially the test, right? Because the language model generated this for us, the test itself was invalid. So we pass it now by doing that correctly. But why did this other test fail? because yeah, this is very interesting, right? Our tests are actually, and this is where like letting something write the tests for us. We could have assumed that our code was wrong and like tried to fix it in the code, but we would have been fixing the wrong thing. So it generates these short codes, which actually, if we read the error message, and that's kind of why I figured it out, like we expected the array of errors to include. So if we scroll back up to when it was passing, well, actually to before it was passing, here, the way that this is structured is expected this, right? Expected this array to include this. And the result is it expected this array, which was empty because we hadn't implemented it yet. So there was no errors implemented, no errors generated. We would expect it to do that. And then when we put the validation in, this now had an error in it, which looked, you know, like, well, I mean, we're not going to see that error. But here, because our tests are being written with so yeah, because they were being written with short codes that were too long, it's actually the array is returning this error message. Well, wait, am I explaining that correctly? I might be saying that backwards, but regardless, this should be, oh yeah. So actually what it was doing is it's actually erroring at the point where it tries to create the press with the short code that's too long. And that's the error that we get back. It just stops and blows up there. So it never gets a chance to check that. So if we do this, yeah, short code nil. Short code nil, duplicate short code, and then the length. I'm actually going to, let's run it again. See that it passes, and then kind of want to, okay, I'm going to leave the order. I'm going to leave the order that way. I'm going to have to figure that out offline as to why that still can't figure this out, and it's throwing this error message that doesn't seem valid. All right, well, we've now got 4 passing tests, which, yeah, I mean, that's good. That's good. Right, that's good. So this should actually create the press. And then if we do a new press, and then we'll just leave URL blank. It doesn't really matter because we're getting an error message that it's already, the short code has already been taken. So like the name we left alone, it doesn't need to be unique. It just needs to be there. So if it's not there, like we're going to get that error message as well, but it doesn't need to be there. And if it is there, it doesn't need to be unique. So that's fine. But this duplicate error message is wrong. So in those instances where we might have some with the same name, they're going to have different short codes. Either they're going to be like 1, 2, 3, you know, or like, I don't know, maybe the California. So instead of the Heritage Press, it would be the, I don't know, the California Heritage Press or something, or the Heritage Press 2020, 2019, which actually would be too long. So in that case, we might have to like think about that, and maybe we make it a 6-character short code instead, and that's fine. We can just change that rule. We just change that right in the validation. That's like it. Probably the only place we would actually need to change that. But yeah, so we have one press here. We have one press in our database. Just like show me the actual, like at least that much. Yeah. Okay, cool. Yeah, so that's pretty cool. We've stumbled through some tests. These are probably like horrible. The way that they're like the setup, right? So like testing is what? Setup, execution, and teardown, I think is like the 3 phases of testing. These are probably terrible. We can probably like, and maybe we'll do this in the next stream. We'll think about these tests which are passing and give us pretty much what we need for press. About like, can we generate context? Yeah, actually, that's probably a good way to think about it. In our next stream, we'll probably like add some contexts. Maybe press is the wrong place to do it because we don't really have a lot going on with it. But like, if we have like duplicate, maybe yeah, I don't know if context will make much sense for press. Maybe we have to get over into like books or works or something else to show that. So context will be things like when the book is published. What is a good example? If the book is has different tags on it or something. You know what? Just keep in mind, we'll be doing context. We might see if we can reduce duplication. Probably not with these. I don't know if these press.valids are needed. I'm not sure if they're needed or like what purpose they're really serving here in these tests. Oh, so I guess by calling press.valid, what it does is generates these error messages. Is that what we were seeing here? Maybe we don't get it here, but the test, I don't know. I'm gonna have to look into that and see why that does, why that's required. I mean, I'm assuming that generates the error messages since we're checking the hash. Yeah. So anyway, these are pretty basic tests, and they may not even do things very well. But we stumbled through some tests. So this was Clueless TTD in Ruby on Rails. We made it. We have 4 passing tests. I hope you learned something. And if you didn't learn something, I hope you had fun. So please tune in for the next one. Remember, I'll be working hopefully soon on some more Let's Code exorcism exercises. If there's interest, I might consider streaming those as well, but probably I'll just continue recording them offline. And this stream was fun for me. If you liked it, let me know. If you didn't like it, let me know why. But yeah, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. And remember, there's gold in them there rubies.